Over the years, there have been many great and terrifying movie serial killer boogeymen. From Jason, to Freddy, to Michael, to Dr. Giggles, to Chucky. Whoa, wait a minute, Dr. Giggles. Now there's a cinematic boogeyman you don't hear about too often.
Well, yeah, people don't really talk about Dr. Giggles that much, do they? I mean, he's not as mainstream as, say, Leatherface or Pinhead, but he is equally enjoyable, terrifying, and oddly funny.
If you think that's bad, wait till you get my bill.
So why is it that we can say films like A Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween are great horror classics, while completely overlooking Dr. Giggles, which carries on the deranged serial killer genre? Why hasn't this film gone down as big as some of those other movies? I mean, don't get me wrong, it has its fan base, and horror fans do seem to love it, it just didn't become as mainstream as some of the others. After all, in many ways, Dr. Giggles is way more terrifying than, say, Jason or Ghostface or any of the others, as he kills people with surgical tools by way of brutal and sadistic surgical torture. It doesn't get any more messed up than that. I can still remember seeing the film for the first time. I was 13 years old and my older sister's boyfriend was babysitting me, and he had just hired it from the video store. Yeah, once upon a time there was video stores, and popped the VHS tape in the VCR, where I was subjected to a tale about a psychotic mental patient who had a love for cutting out his patient's heart, who escapes after being locked up for 30 years and heads to his hometown, where, armed with his surgical bloodlust and one-liners, he sets out on a killing spree.
Have a heart.
And in classic slasher movie style, he is defeated by a young female teenager who otherwise appears to be weak but becomes a brave fighter when she stands up to the challenge of surviving. I enjoyed the movie and thought it was perfectly fine, but then, like so many others, I forgot all about it.
In fact, when I announced this episode on the Minty Comedic Arts Facebook page, there was lots of similar responses, with people saying, "Oh yeah, I forgot all about that, it was a good film." So it's not just me who forgot all about this movie, despite how enjoyable it actually is. Well, today we are going to remember and give Dr. Giggles his fair dues, as we further celebrate Halloween of 2018 by checking out 10 amazing facts about Dr. Giggles. Then hopefully we can all remember, and maybe this time not forget.
I hope you have protection.
Number 10. The composer came from a land down under. Dr. Giggles was scored by Brian May. No, not that Brian May, this guy. Brian May, Australian film composer. Throughout his career, May had scored many great classic Australian movies, such as Mad Max, The Road Warrior, Gallipoli, and Frog Dreaming. However, Dr. Giggles wasn't his only venture into Hollywood horror movies, as just 1 year prior he also composed the score for Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. Isn't that strange how he went from doing Aussie movies to Hollywood slasher ones? His score for Dr. Giggles works. It's intense when it wants to be, while still enjoying a certain fun, playful early 90s cheese. Sadly, May passed away in 1997, but he will always be remembered as an Aussie legend in the Australian film industry. Number 9. The movie got ripped apart by critics. Despite the fact that Dr. Giggles has a cult-like status with an army of adoring fans, as usual, the poo-poo pants critics who seem to be allergic to fun tore the movie to shreds upon its release, which actually may have ensued Dr. Giggles' fate as not being as well known or as celebrated as it could have been. I don't know if either by 1992 critics were just fed up with the slasher genre, or if they just weren't in the mood for a pharmaceutical serial killer. But it seemed that hardly anyone had anything good to say about Dr. Giggles. Variety felt that not enough care went into the script, and went as far as to call it uneven. The Washington Post called it a, quote, desperate attempt to revive a script that began in critical condition but ends up in DOA. And the New York Times claimed the script is barely stitched together.
If I were you, I'd get a second opinion.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of complaints about the script, but what did people expect? It's just a dumb, simple, fun movie about a serial killer murdering people while giggling. I mean, this isn't exactly Lawrence of Arabia.
Number 8, the movie was directed by a top TV producer. The movie was written and directed by Manny Coto. Dr. Giggles was based on his fear of hospitals and surgery procedures, which many people seem to have, hence why the movie resonated with its audience. Although director Coto may not be well known for his movies, I mean, Dr. Giggles aside, we have Star Kid. Yeah, everyone remember that? The one where the kid from Jurassic Park befriends a robot alien spacesuit? Or how about The Other Me? The Disney classic where some kid clones himself. Yeah, remember that? Anyone? Well, although his movie work may not be so well known, he does seem to be a very successful TV producer, working on many great TV shows that you no doubt would have seen at some stage. During his career, he has been an executive producer and showrunner for Star Trek Enterprise, along with providing episodes for Tales from the Crypt and Outer Limits, and would even go on to be a producer on 24 and Dexter, making his love for brutal surgical torture come full circle. Number 7, Dr. Giggles vs. Candyman. Yep, as epic as it sounds, Dr. Giggles did go head to head with another popular 90s killer, the Candyman, as they waged war against each other for box office dollars, as both movies were released just over a week from one another, with Candyman being released on October the 16th, 1992, and Dr. Giggles came out October 23rd, 1992. So if you were around in 1992, you would have gotten to bear witness to the rise of two modern movie monsters. Without a doubt, Candyman did much better, racking in $25.7 million, whereas Dr. Giggles made $8.4 million. And Candyman was generally better received by critics, and is much more remembered within the horror movie fan community, and celebrated for that matter. I think they are both great movies, it's just that Dr. Giggles was still riding off the serial killer movie comedy cheesiness that the Nightmare on Elm Street movies had dived into, whereas Candyman was a more brooding and serious movie. So maybe because Candyman tried something different and escaped the horror movie cheese, it just appealed more to audiences at the time.
Also, on the exact same day, October 23rd, 1992, Reservoir Dogs came out. So not only did Dr. Giggles have the misfortune of going up against Candyman, but also Mr. Blonde and his ear cutting off Happy Ways. Wow, October 1992 was surprisingly really gruesome.
Number 6, casting possibilities. So the big question is, who could have taken on the big mantle of the deranged, larger-than-life Dr. Giggles? Well, I know I often say this in my show, but it really is difficult to picture anyone but Larry Drake in the role, as it just seemed well suited to him, and he perfectly balanced out being evil and creepy, while also being humorous, dishing out many one-liners.
Lucky for you, I've discovered the only known cure for the common cold.
However, at one stage, Ted Danson was considered for the part, which would have been, well, to be honest, I don't know what that would have been. And another actor who was also considered for the part was Matt Frewer, aka Max Headroom himself. My god, that would have been something else. I can actually see him as a serial killer, to be honest. And the interesting thing is, Frewer has a very slim build, whereas Drake had a much larger frame. So it's interesting how they went from one body size to the complete opposite. And in addition to that, Jennifer Aniston and Ashley Judd also auditioned for the movie. I guess Aniston didn't get the part because at the time she was too busy dealing with leprechauns. Number 5, cuts had to be made. As often with horror movies that push boundaries and are considered edgy, Dr. Giggles had to undergo some drastic cuts in order for it to even get an R rating. So yeah, somewhere out there is a version of Dr. Giggles that is even more brutal and violent than the one we got. Sheesh, that's some pretty intense shit right there, I tell you. Director Manny Coto claimed that back in the early 90s, the MPAA were very tough on horror movies, with strict requirements to the amount of gore and violence that were allowed to be shown in a movie. Coto had to cut quite a lot of the movie out to appease the MPAA.
He should have kept his hands to himself.
Still, the version we got of Dr. Giggles is still pretty balls to the wall gruesome and violent, so there's still that.
Number 4. Dr. Giggles has a big mouth. There is one very interesting shot in the movie where we see Dr. Giggles put a mouth dispenser in someone's mouth, with a camera shot from inside the mouth creating a very visually interesting effect, which honestly also looks quite horrific. In order to accomplish this shot, a very big giant mouth prop was made. So yeah, the production team literally made a giant mouth, and actor Larry Drake stood in front of it with a camera facing down the giant mouth prop. As for creating the effect of making the mouth dispenser look bigger, well, that too was a big prop that was made. A giant mouth dispenser that Drake had to hold and place down in the big mouth prop. It all sounds so easy when you learn about how this effect was done, but it still looks very effective in Dr. Giggles, adding to the movie's threatening and surreal tone. Number 3, Dr. Giggles came out at a time when Larry Drake's fame was really taking off. Larry Drake was cast as Dr. Giggles when his stardom had really peaked. Drake had been around for years playing extra work in movies and TV shows, namely The Karate Kid as Yahoo 1 at Beach. And yes, that is what he was actually credited as in that film. But Drake really made it big when he starred in the popular TV show LA Law from 1987 to 1994, where he played a mentally handicapped character called Benny. And Drake's performance was so well received, he won 2 Emmys for his portrayal. And while making LA Law, he also starred as the main villain Durant in the sadistic, gritty superhero movie Darkman, another movie which has gone on to be considered a classic. So by 1992, Drake was pretty big business. But sadly, round about that time, his career then started to fade. I think the last thing I remember seeing him in was American Pie 2. I don't know what happened to Drake's career and why it just suddenly stalled, but my guess would be because LA Law finished in 1994, and that was his acting lifeline, so to speak, what everyone knew him by and what kept him in the public spotlight. But that's just a guess. Sadly, Drake passed away in 2016, and we lost an acting legend who could be both sympathetic and innocent, but also menacing and intimidating.
Yep, Larry Drake was actually a very diverse actor with lots of talents and skills that shouldn't be overlooked.
Number 2, Dr. Giggles likes Dr. Mario. So while Dr. Giggles brutally kills some teenagers in a house, we see that while this is happening, some kid is playing Dr. Mario, based on the old NES game that was very popular at the time, which mixes Mario with Tetris and, diseases? I guess it made sense to have a medical themed video game, seeing how this is a movie about a doctor after all. Not since The Wizard has there been such a perfect video game product placement in a movie. But what's even more fascinating is that Dr. Giggles doesn't kill this kid, because he sees that he's playing Dr. Mario and then naturally decides to move on. Oh yeah, that's how awesome Nintendo was back in the early 90s. Just even playing a video game can save you from a brutal death by a sadistic movie serial killer. And what's even more baffling is when Giggles looks at the screen, he seems to understand the game and knows that the kid is losing.
Terminal.
As if Dr. Giggles is more than caught up with the mystical ways of Nintendo power, despite being locked up for 30 odd years. So this makes you wonder, if Dr. Giggles knows and understands Dr. Mario, does that mean he plays it in his spare time? Did he have access to a Nintendo game system in his mental hospital where he had been locked up? This one little scene just poses so many questions. Number 1. Comic book. Dr. Giggles was produced by Dark Horse Comics, so I guess it's fitting to have a comic book based off it. Which there was, in the form of this 2-part comic series, and as you would imagine, the comic is every bit as gruesome and as horrific as the movie. It perfectly catches the feel and look of the film, along with some of the uncomfortable in-your-face gore, and I love how the comic captures Larry Drake's likeness, and really captures the sadistic mania of Giggles. This comic is definitely one for the fans and not for the faint of heart. And ironically, just like the movie, the comic has somewhat disappeared into obscurity. In fact, the mania and over-the-top violence and use of colours seen in the comic really reminds me of the Mask comic book, which Dark Horse also released. In fact, it almost looks as though the Mask and Dr. Giggles comics were part of the same twisted universe. And considering the movie was co-produced by Dark Horse Comics, makes me wonder if they did have plans to make an actual comic book series of Dr. Giggles. But it didn't happen because the movie just didn't take off. Well, we may never know. But it's just nice knowing that Dr. Giggles and The Mask originate from the same comic book company.
So to conclude, it's time to remember Dr. Giggles and to enjoy this movie for what it is. A fun, silly, enjoyable serial killer horror movie. Hopefully now we can all go back and look at it, and maybe Dr. Giggles can go up a few notches in the mainstream horror zeitgeist. Because Dr. Giggles deserves a mantle just as much as any other of the movie boogeyman killers. Anyway, I'm Minty, and I'm off to play some Dr. Mario, because apparently it protects you from serial killers. See ya!